Winter has always been the season when the world feels older. Nights stretch long across the hills, snow gathers quietly along rooftops, and the wind seems to carry voices that do not belong only to the living. Long before cities glowed against the dark, people gathered around small fires and told the stories that helped them understand the cold months, tales of spirits, wanderers and watchers who moved between hearthlight and shadow. Some of these tales were born in forests, where frost hung heavy on every branch. Others rose from quiet villages, where the smell of bread and smoke mingled with the stillness of early dawn. And some came from the far north, carried on winds that shook the rafters and made entire households fall silent. Together, they formed the folklore of winter, stories meant not only to frighten, but to comfort, to teach, and to remind us that warmth and kindness matter most when the nights grow longest. Tonight we follow three of these old winter spirits. From the deep Slavic forests comes Morozko, the stern father of frosts, whose breath can wither or bless, depending on the heart he finds before him. From the quiet Italian hills arrives Befana, the old woman of Epiphany Eve, who once missed her chance to meet a miracle and has spent every winter night since trying to make amends through small acts of love. And from the northern storm clouds thunders the wild hunt, a host of riders who gallop across the sky in the dead of winter, reminding mortals that not all spirits rest peacefully when the cold season returns. Each comes from a different land, a different belief, a different fear or hope, yet they belong to the same ancient world of winter, where frost and fire share the same breath, and every night holds a story waiting to be remembered. So settle in, let the quiet of the season gather softly around you, and listen as we walk once more into the snow-covered world of Christmas folklore. And so, as winter settles deep across the land and the world grows quiet beneath its weight, we begin with one of the oldest stories told on cold nights, a tale born in the dense forests of the Slavic world, where frost itself was believed to walk among the trees. This is the story of Morozko, the frost father, and the children whose hearts he tested when the snow lay thickest. Chapter 1. The Cold Command. In another age, when the fields lay hushed beneath their white shroud and the smoke of the hearth rose straight into a sky of iron, there lived a man whose house was divided, not by walls, but by the breath of envy. He had a daughter from his first joy, quiet and diligent, who moved through the rooms as a candle moves through night, casting small circles of gentleness wherever she passed. He had also taken a second wife, and she, finding in the girl a mirror where her own heart could not bear to look, filled the winter air with words that bit like frost. Thus, before the doors and between the rafters, there dwelt a cold more dangerous than any north wind. It is said that the snow had already begun to crust, and that the rivers had tightened their grip along the banks, when the stepmother's counsel hardened into command. She spoke softly where kindness should have lived, and sweetly where truth should have stood, and in that softness and sweetness there lay a blade. The father, who loved peace more than courage, listened as if to a lullaby, and the lullaby told him to drive his daughter into the forest and leave her to the judgment of the season. He protested as a branch protests, under ice, brittle and brief, and then he bowed his head beneath a weight he would not lift. Some remember that the girl heard little of this, for her hands were busy and her thoughts turned towards simple duties. The stepmother, who favored her own child with warmth and ribbons, clothed the stepdaughter in praise only when others watched, and in silence when none did. Where the elder girl gathered kindling and swept the threshold, the younger glittered in idle comfort, Yet the elder did not complain. She learned the speech of work and quiet, and it taught her not to lift her eyes in pride, nor to let them fall into despair. The hearth, which knows the measure of each inhabitant, knew this, and kept its small ember of affection for her. The day chosen for exile came with a clear, ringing cold. The father's sled creaked like an old prayer, and the harness sounded faintly, as if bells were buried deep in snow. He wrapped his daughter in what garments could be spared, not the finest and not the worst, and set a blanket at her feet, as one sets a token upon a grave one hopes to visit again. He told himself that he would return soon, that he would only set her down where the pines gather and the wind is steady, and that he would be back before the frost remembered her name. They rode into the forest, where the world grows taller and speech grows small. The birches watched with their white faces, expressionless and attentive, and the firs held their breath as if marking a boundary. Snow powdered the eyelashes of the girl and salted the father's beard, and each flake seemed to counsel silence. There are moments when a single word could unmake a fate, and yet that word is not spoken. So it was now. The father's hands tightened upon the reins, then loosened, then tightened again. The horse, innocent of human bargains, did not turn its head. At a small clearing, where the sky opened like a pale eye, he drew the sled to a halt. The cold lay there like an altar cloth. He helped his daughter down, and his mouth moved, as if to shape a blessing. But the blessing, like a fearful bird, would not come to rest upon his tongue. Instead he said what men say when they wish to hide themselves, that he would return soon, that she should wait by the birch, and keep her courage, that there was no danger in a forest that belonged to honest folk. The girl bowed her head, not in defeat, but in courtesy, for even now she would not reproach him. Her breath rose gently in the air and drifted away, like a message no one could read. She straightened the blanket upon the stump where she would sit and tucked her hands into her sleeves. The color in her cheeks was not from fear, it was from the cold that seeks out the living as flame seeks out the wick. He turned the sled and went. The runners whispered of distance, and then the whisper became a silence that stretched between tree and tree. Alone remained the girl, a small warmth set down within a great whiteness. Around her the forest kept the counsel of all things, the slow settling of snow upon branch, the soft complaint of a trunk under winter's hand, the faint, crystalline ringing that sometimes comes when the air itself seems to sing of emptiness. It is said that time behaves differently where a heart is being weighed. Minutes can become long corridors, and hours can fold upon themselves like wings. The girl sat, and the cold pressed closer, curious and impartial. She spoke to it as one might speak to a stern relative, without presumption and without fear. She did not ask for mercy, for she knew that mercy is not always found at the asking. She held herself upright and waited to be addressed. From the far edge of the clearing, there came a stirring, scarcely more than the quiver that passes through frost when a shadow falls. It passed along the birch trunks, a touch like glass upon glass, and the air grew sharper, as if a blade had been drawn and shown to the day. In such moments, the old speak of a presence that belongs more to season than to story, the one whose breath etches windows, whose fingers write delicate laws upon pond and eave, whose footfalls are heard as the cracking of distant ice. Whether one names him or not, the cold has a master, and the master has a voice. The girl lowered her eyes, as one might before a noble whose face is cloaked in winter. She felt the questions gathering around her like snowdrifts, questions about patience in speech, about humility in the face of danger, about the manner in which a living soul receives the touch of a force that does not hate and does not love, but simply is. If fear visited her, it passed quickly, finding little that would shelter it. Back along the trail, the father rode as men ride when they wish to outrun their own reflection. The harness bells sounded thinly, and every tree looked like a witness. He told himself many small comforts, that the cold was not so deep, that her youth would shield her, that others had survived worse with less. The house awaited him with its tidy lies, and he dismounted beneath the eaves, as though they could protect him from the sky. Inside, the stepmother's eyes were bright with a warmth that did not heat the room. She asked if the work were done with the softness of velvet set over iron. He nodded, and the nod became a stone that would not leave his throat. Night approached the clearing with the stealth of a great cat. The shadows lengthened and joined hands, and the pale light atop the snow faded until the world seemed made of grey breath. The girl listened to the sounds that remain when all others have gone, the slow ticking of cold within wood, the faint sigh of the snow settling in its sleep, the faraway snap like a star breaking. She gathered her calm around her as one gathers a shawl, not to keep out the cold, for that is impossible, but to keep in the flame that must not go out. And then, as quiet returns to a church, after candles have been snuffed, the clearing received another presence. It did not thunder, and it did not boast. It arrived as authority often does, by simply being there. The air tightened. The frost, which had until now been an atmosphere, took on the shape of a listener. A voice moved through the branches without wind, and though it spoke no word, the world answered, as if addressed by name. So it begins, say the old tales, when the season itself turns its face toward a human soul. The trial is not of strength, for strength becomes brittle here, nor of wit, for wit learns humility, where breath is made visible. It is a trial of bearing, of courtesy, before the unappeasable, of the heart's manner, when time grows thin, and the border between life and the long sleep is a single frost, drawn line upon the earth. She folded her hands within her sleeves, and lifted her head. Whatever would be asked of her, she would answer without complaint. Whatever would be offered, she would receive without greed. Whatever would be taken, she would surrender without bitterness. The cold leaned nearer, and the clearing listened, and somewhere beyond the trees, where the night goes to sharpen its blades, a frost older than memory drew breath to speak. Thus the command of the house carried its echo into the forest, and the forest, which keeps the secrets of commands and their consequences, prepared to answer. In the stillness between question and reply, the snow deepened, and the world remembered that winter does not hate, and winter does not hurry. It only comes, and in coming reveals what has long been waiting to be seen. Chapter 2. The Frost Speaks. The forest lay still, each branch etched in silver, every shadow precise, as if drawn by the hand of an unseen artisan. The girl waited, her breath faint upon the air, and in that breath 1,000 small stars flickered and died. Around her, the world held its composure, as if it too awaited an answer to an ancient question. And then it came, a sound not of voice, but of temperature itself, lowering its gaze upon her. The frost spoke. Its words were the creak of ice against bark, the small percussive notes of sap surrendering to stillness, the crystalline whisper that runs along the surface of ponds when they tighten into mirrors. The girl understood none of these sounds as language, yet something within her heart heard them clearly. They asked her if she was cold. She answered softly, not in fear, but in truth, saying that she was chilled, yet grateful for the beauty of the night. The frost listened, and for a moment the air grew sharper, not in malice, but in consideration. Then again the cold shifted, coiling upward from the ground, examining her patience. The trees leaned in closer, as witnesses. "Are you warm enough, child?" the voice of the frost asked again, this time through the groan of a distant tree, through the glittering fall of snow dust from a pine's heavy limbs. Her lips trembled, yet she smiled faintly, and whispered that she was well, that she thanked the forest for keeping her company. Her humility settled into the clearing, like a new layer of snow, light but unyielding. The frost, curious, moved nearer. It brushed the edge of her scarf, and traced the curve of her cheek with fingers that belonged to no man and no beast. Where it touched, the world seemed to ring faintly, as if a glass bell had been struck. The girl did not flinch. Her heart was steady, her spirit as still as the pond beneath the crust of ice. And so the frost leaned closer still, testing the boundary between endurance and despair, between mortal flesh and immortal law. The voice gathered within the hush, this time clear and terrible in its clarity, neither male nor female, but vast, shaped from the total of all winters that had ever been. "Are you afraid?" it asked, though the question was less of fear and more of recognition, for fear, too, is part of obedience. The girl lowered her gaze and answered as truth demanded. "I am small," she said, "but I do not wish harm upon the cold. It does what it must, and I shall do the same." It is told that at these words, the frost paused. There are laws even the seasons obey, and among them is this, that what yields without breaking may endure where the proud are shattered. The cold stepped back and considered her answer. In the silence that followed, the air brightened, the moon appeared over the rim of the forest, pale and slow, laying its light upon her shoulders like a benediction. Then came the softest sound, like silk drawn through rings, and before her stood Morozko himself. He was tall as a pine, and narrow as an icicle drawn from heaven. His beard fell in glistening threads of ice, and his cloak shimmered like hoarfrost at dawn. His eyes were the color of distance, and when he breathed, the world hushed to listen. He regarded the girl not as prey, nor trespasser, but as one whose spirit had walked into his dominion and stood without deceit. For all his power, there was no cruelty in him, only judgment, cold and unchanging. "Child of men," said Morozko, his voice the slow crack of frozen earth, "how do you find the night?" She bowed her head and replied, "The night is beautiful, my lord, though it is cold." He tilted his head slightly, as though hearing a melody in her tone. "Do you curse its coldness?" "I do not," she said, "for cold keeps the world honest, and I would not have it lie." The frost deepened, gleaming with starlight. Morozko's Stet's cloak stirred, and 1,000 glittering motes drifted from it, like tiny suns extinguished in descent. "And if I were to take your warmth," he asked, "would you bless me still?" The girl thought a moment, for truth deserves thought. "If it were your will, my lord," she said, "then I would bless you, for you have spared the world from deceit, and I would die in the company of something pure." Morozko's gaze held hers. There was no movement, only the slow crystallization of respect between two beings who understood their place in the great accord of creation. Then he smiled, and the smile was light itself refracted through frost. "Then you shall not die," he said. At his words, the forest sighed, the branches shed their burden of snow, and a wind stirred that smelled faintly of pine resin and distant hearth smoke. Morozko lifted his hand, and from the air itself came gifts, a cloak thick as winter's heart, a chest bound in silver, jewels like captive stars. She placed them before her and said, "Because you spoke truth to the cold, warmth shall answer you. Because you bowed not in fear, but in grace, the frost shall remember your name." And with that, he vanished. The snow where he had stood was unmarked, yet glowed faintly, as though lit from within by a secret fire. The girl wrapped herself in the new cloak, feeling its weight, soft as fur, warm as faith, and bowed her head to the empty clearing. Gratitude bloomed within her, like Thor beneath the surface. She did not shout nor sing. She simply sat and let the silence of the world fold around her once more. When morning came, the forest was golden. Birds spoke in quiet tones from the eaves of branches. Far away, her father's sled creaked again along the path. He came with dread in his chest and disbelief in his eyes, for he had dreamt of her lifeless and pale. Yet when he saw her standing among the snowdrifts, adorned in riches and wrapped in warmth, he fell to his knees. The frost had spoken, and its judgment had been merciful. Thus ended the first trial, but the frost's fairness, once proven, would be tested again. For envy does not sleep, and where blessing falls, resentment soon follows. Beyond the edge of the forest, the stepmother's house waited, and with it, the heart that would summon cold, not from sky or season, but from within itself. Chapter 3. The Mirror of Envy. When the girl returned from the forest, her father could scarcely speak. The sled groaned under the weight of her treasures, chests of silver and gold, garments fine as sunlight caught in ice. Yet she herself was brighter than all of it, her face serene, her eyes still reflecting the hush of the woods. The village gathered to see her, and whispers rippled through the air like the wind along frozen reeds. Some spoke of miracles, others of witchcraft, but the old who know that the world gives only what one has already sown, merely nodded and said, "The frost is fair." At the doorway, the stepmother waited. The sight of the girl alive, wrapped in warmth and wonder, turned her gaze to stone. She smiled, but it was the smile of water hardening under sudden cold. Her own daughter, idle and ornamented, ran forward to touch the jewels. Envy is quick in youth, and where envy walks, cruelty is not far behind. The father, seeking refuge in gratitude, recounted what had happened, how Morozko himself had spoken, how the forest had spared the girl. The stepmother listened, as one listens to a tale meant for someone else, her eyes measuring the worth of every word. When he finished, she feigned amazement, her voice honeyed. "How blessed we are," she said, "that the frost should favor our house. Surely my daughter must go as well, that she too may earn such grace." The father's heart sank, but the spell of obedience had not yet broken. He murmured that the journey was perilous, that fortune rarely repeats itself. Yet the stepmother's will was a season unto itself, cold, persistent, inevitable. She wrapped her daughter in garments too rich for travel, placed trinkets in her hands, as though they might bribe the elements, and sent the sled forth again into the same pale wilderness. The stepdaughter watched from the threshold. She did not speak, for she knew that blessing cannot be defended by argument. Instead, she laid a small bundle of food by the hearth, should hunger follow her sister home. Her father, heavy with dread, took the reins once more. The road to judgment is not long, yet it lengthens in the heart of those who have learned its cost. They came to the clearing, where the snow still held the faint impression of the first girl's vigil. The trees stood as witnesses again, though their branches bore new frost, their patience unbroken. The younger daughter, alighted from the sled with a toss of her head. She complained of the cold, of the seat, of the silence. The father tried to warn her, but warnings cannot warm those who do not listen. He said he would return soon, and the words felt like ash in his mouth. When he was gone, the forest resumed its breathing. The girl stamped her feet and called out, demanding that Morozko appear and grant her gifts more splendid than her sisters. The cold gathered at the edges of the clearing, faint at first, as if uncertain of its welcome. Then it advanced, patient, inevitable. A wind rose, not fierce, but clear. A voice of inquiry. "Are you warm, maiden?" it asked, through the trembling of pine needles. She shivered and frowned. "No, I am not warm. Why do you ask such foolish questions? Bring me a cloak like my sister Sips." The forest quieted, and the frost deepened. Again the voice came, this time closer, more defined. "Are you comfortable now?" It murmured, with the tone of a teacher repeating a lesson. Her breath turned sharp with anger. "No, I am freezing, and you are cruel to keep me waiting. Where are my jewels? Where is my silver chest? Must I beg, like some peasant girl?" The silence that followed was colder than any wind. The trees no longer leaned to listen. They stood straight, as if unwilling to share her company. The air tightened, each flake of snow a particle of judgment. The voice spoke once more, low and distant. "Are you cold now, child of scorn?" She laughed, brittle and proud. "I am, and I care not. You should serve me, spirit, as you served my sister. I command you to bring me her riches, and more besides." It is said that the frost has patience until it is mocked, and then it remembers its dominion. The air turned blue with severity. The wind ceased altogether. Where warmth had once been, there came a stillness, so perfect it became soundless pain. The girl tried to move, but the cold held her fast, not in rage, but in completion, the kind that ends all quarrels. When her father returned, the clearing was silent as a sealed tomb. The snow lay smooth and glittering. Beneath it, he found only stillness. The jewels she had desired shone faintly upon her hands, but they were made of frost and would melt by dawn. He carried her home in silence. The house met him with weeping, but his tears were older than theirs. The stepmother's cries echoed through the rafters, but they found no mercy in them, only the sound of a heart breaking against the truth it had summoned. The kind daughter, seeing her father's grief, laid a hand upon his sleeve. "Let the frost have peace now," she said. She said it did only what we invited. Her words, gentle yet unanswerable, fell upon the room like falling snow, soft yet final. Outside, the season continued, as it always had. The trees shed no tears, and the wind sang no lament. The frost had spoken twice, once in mercy, once in measure, and its judgment was complete. By spring, only the story remained, told by firesides and carried through generations, that kindness endures where arrogance cannot, and that the cold, though deadly, is never unjust. And so ends the tale of Morozko's trial, where winter itself became the instrument of truth, and in its silence the human heart was weighed and found. Chapter 4. The Season Sips. Mercy. When spring first trembled beneath the horizon, the snow upon the eaves began to loosen its hold. Water traced slow lines down the faces of stones, and the forest exhaled after its long restraint. Beneath the thawing crust, The earth murmured softly, as if remembering something sacred yet unfinished, for even when winter departs, it leaves its echo behind, a memory of what was taken and of what was spared. The father wandered often to the edge of the forest, his heart heavy with both sorrow and gratitude, sought peace where silence had once spoken. He had seen the frost judgment. He had felt the cold measure of justice that spares neither the wicked nor the weak. And though grief bent his shoulders, there was something within him that had thawed, a kind of honesty, painful and pure. He no longer turned his face from the truth. The world, he understood now, moves by balances older than pity. The kind daughter tended the house in quiet rhythm. She asked for nothing, spoke little, and carried warmth into each corner she touched. Her hands, once raw from labor, now moved with gentle certainty. The hearth answered her presence, burning steadier when she drew near. The neighbors spoke of her with reverence, saying that the frost had kissed her not to harm, but to consecrate. There is a blessing, they said, that lies hidden in endurance, a warmth that no flame can grant. The stepmother did not leave her bed. The fever that took her came without warning, though perhaps it had begun long before in the cold envy that had lived within her breast. She called for her daughter in delirium, but no answer came from beyond the veil of her dreams. Her cries echoed through the rafters, like wind lost in hollow trees, and though the kind daughter tended her, mercy could not mend what had been chosen. The house grew quieter each night, until only the sound of the fire remained, a patient, unjudging witness. One evening, as dusk painted the snow-melt gold, the girl stepped outside. The air was cool still, the kind of cold that does not wound but clarifies. She walked to the edge of the wood, where the shadows gathered like memory. There, she felt the faintest stirring, a breath against her cheek, neither warm nor chill, but unmistakably alive. The birches trembled, shedding drops of melting frost that fell upon her hair like blessings. It is said that she heard a voice then, distant as a mountain echo, soft as a sigh beneath ice. Child of men, it murmured, you bore the winter as it was meant to be borne. The frost remembers. She bowed her head, though no figure stood before her. She did not seek to see him again, for she understood that some presences belong to silence. Yet she felt within her a calm that would never wholly fade, a serenity like that of snow, untouched by footprints, vast, patient, and eternal. The seasons turned, the fields broke open in green, and the rivers ran quick and clear. Children laughed where once the cold had claimed them, and life resumed its endless dialogue with death. But among the people, the tale endured, of a girl who met the frost with humility and was spared, of another who mocked it and was undone, and of a spirit who judged without hatred. By the next winter, when frost flowers began to bloom again upon the windows, the villagers would whisper her name as they banked their fires. Mothers would tell their children to greet the cold politely when it knocked upon the panes, for it is said that Morozko listens still, and sometimes on nights when the moon hangs low and the world turns white as memory, a soft glitter moves across the trees, and the air hums faintly, not in threat, but in remembrance. For the frost is not cruel, only precise. It takes what is false and leaves what endures. Its mercy is not warmth, but truth, that beauty, when patient, survives even the coldest of seasons, and those who meet the winter with grace will find that spring, when it comes, knows their names. Thus ends the tale of Morozko, the frost's judgment, the mirror of envy, the season's mercy, a story told in breath and silence, in kindness, and in cold. And though the years may melt away, still the lesson lingers that humility softens the heart of even the hardest winter, and that the frost, when it speaks, speaks only the language of truth. From the frozen forests of the north, our path now turns southward, toward gentler hills and warmer lights. Here winter is quieter, carried not by howling winds, but by the soft glow of hearths and the smell of bread rising in small stone cottages. It is in this landscape that another spirit of winter walks, not stern like Morozko, but human, humble, and filled with a longing that shaped generations. This is the story of La Befana, the old woman who followed a star too late and whose kindness became her endless journey. Chapter 1. The Visitors. Snow lay in a thin, stubborn rind along the lanes, not enough to slow the carts that creaked through the village, but enough to make each doorstep glisten where the morning sweep had pushed it into pale, neat ridges. Inside a narrow cottage near the well, an old woman kept her broom in steady motion. She had always done so. People said that if the whole of winter could be tidied, she would have it bundled by noon, the ashes bagged, the hearthstones clean enough to catch the light. They said it without malice. They said it with a fond shake of the head and a glance toward the small window where she was certain to appear, a kerchief pinned tight, eyes sharp for dust and weather. Her name was known to everyone in the village, but most simply called her the old woman near the well. She lived alone, not by choice at first, and later by habit. She had been a diligent neighbor, a good hand to call when someone's flour ran short or a latch stuck in frost. She was not gentle in her words, but she was reliable, and where the days were short and the hills rang with iron-cold reliability counted for more than sweetness. She rose before dawn, swept her threshold, kneaded dough, and kept a small pot of honey near the fire to thin with hot water for anyone who knocked with a cough. The broom and the hearth were her trade, and she kept both faithfully. That winter, the sky carried a brightness that did not belong to any season she remembered. It had appeared first, like a stubborn nail of light hammering through cloud, and then, as nights passed, it grew and did not move as other stars did. People stepped out at evening to look and measured its place with the tips of their fingers. They argued softly about what it meant. She did not argue. She measured it by how it colored her floorboards at dawn. The beam made a diagonal that crossed her table and landed on the far wall, and she sanded that patch clean because sunlight, she believed, should not fall on grime. On the day the travelers came, she had just lifted bread from the oven. The crusts cracked and sent up a smell that made her think of stronger years, when her steps had not ached and laughter came easier. Wind rasped along the eaves. The broom paused in her hand because the sound outside was not the usual rattle of a cart or the hard jog of a horse in cold. It was a softer, many-throated sound, bells speaking to one another in quick, bright notes. The dog in the lane barked once, and then grew silent, as though surprise had pushed the breath from him. She pulled her shawl tight and opened the door. The air pinched her face. Down the road came 3 figures on sturdy animals, cloaks at their shoulders, the color of thick wine, of saffron, of the blue her mother had once used in festival ribbons. Behind them moved a small train of attendants, with packs that did not slump the way a tradesman's sacks slump. These were well balanced, wrapped with care, and above the leading figures' heads, the strange bright star showed itself even in daylight, plying the thin winter sky like a coin pushed through wool. The village slowed for them. Faces peered from windows. A boy skidded on the snow and was caught by his mother's quick hand. The three riders reined in by the well. One of them, with a beard touched by grey and eyes soft as he leaned down, asked in careful words for water. The old woman with the broom stepped forward because no one else moved, and she held the bucket and rope as she had 1,000 times in 1,000 winters. When the water came up, cold with a rim of ice that broke into shards like glass petals, she dipped a ladle and offered it. The man drank, then another, younger and keen-eyed, accepted his share with a nod. The third smiled with tired gratitude and warmed his hands over his horse's breath. "What road is best?" the grey-bearded one asked. "For one who follows that star." He spoke Italian slowly, with the careful weight of someone playing a melody learned from far away. Behind his words, the old woman heard other languages and other roads. She looked at the sky. The star did not move, now that she wanted it to show her the way. It hovered above the line of low hills, as though stitched there. She knew the tracks across those hills, and the paths around them, as she knew the stains on her own table. "You could take the Roman road," she said, and none of the bystanders laughed at the old name. Some of them still used. "It will be faster, but colder. The wind comes along it, like a messenger who will not stop. Or you can skirt the orchards and the willow paths. The ground is softer, even in frost. Are you going far?" "Far," said the keen-eyed one, and his gaze went to the star, the way a farmer's gaze goes to the edge of a storm. "We seek a child." The word struck her small room of a heart in a place she did not show. She kept her mouth firm. "A child? There are many. Whose?" "A child who has been promised," the grey-bearded rider answered, and something in his voice placed the words outside the village entirely. "We have followed signs. We are late, but we will not turn back." The old woman considered them the way she considered every task, step by step. They had come far. Their animals were well kept. Their hands were not smooth. They were not men who sent others to do their work. But it was deep winter, and the day would lean into evening soon. "Come to my hearth first," she said. "Even a short fire can put new legs under a traveler." So she led them to her cottage, and there was a small bustle at the door as the attendant stood outside, and the three riders ducked beneath the lintel with care not to knock their heads. Her house was tidy, because it was always tidy. She set the bread on the table, its heat sending a low faint drum through the wood, and poured the thin honey water. The men drank with thanks. She broke the bread and placed it in their hands herself, because that was her way, to be exact, in small things. When they had eaten, she found a jar of dried figs she had been saving for the day after Epiphany, and opened it without regret. They ate those too, and the color returned to the youngest rider's face. They asked again about roads, about the hills, and the frost-bound streams. Their accents wore different edges, one crisp, one rolling, one like the sea in winter. The old woman answered what she could. She told them where a shepherd kept a lean-to that would break the wind if they needed to stop, and where the ground dipped and hid ice beneath a film of water. They listened with the attention of men who understood that directions given in a warm room could become mistakes on an empty ridge. When they rose to leave, the grey-bearded one lifted a small pouch from his belt. She shook her head quickly. No, it was bread and water, not a bargain. "Then accept a blessing," he said simply. He spoke a few words she did not know, but whose tone felt like the moment when a long-held breath is released. She nodded, not out of piety, for she kept her piety in the work of her hands, but out of respect for gratitude well given. At the door he paused. "Come with us," he said. If you wish, there is room on the road for one more. We go to honor a child. We go to honor the one under that star. Her broom rested in the corner like a companion waiting to be consulted. The fire in the hearth needed tending, or it would gutter and leave smoke in the rafters. Dough sat under a cloth, swelling slowly toward tomorrow's loaves. She had promised to look in on the shoemaker's wife, who was carrying her first baby and not sleeping well. The lanes were not going to sweep themselves, and Ash did not walk out without help. All of these were reasons, and she did not need to list them aloud, because the men did not press her. She saw that they would accept her yes or her no with equal grace. She felt also the weight of stepping beyond her routine, and in that moment, the weight was heavier than her curiosity. I am a woman of this house, she said. This is my road. I would only slow you. The keen-eyed rider looked toward the window where the star held its fixed brilliance. He gave a tiny nod, as though her answer had been expected and did not offend. Then thank you for your table and your words, he said. If we should return this way, we will remember your door. They went out into the early winter afternoon. The village watched the small procession find its shape again. Children counted the bells. The old woman stood in the doorway with her shawl tight and the broom in her hand, and when the riders turned at the well to take the road she had advised, she lifted the broom in a small, involuntary gesture, like a wave, and then pretended she had only shifted it to her other hand. The cottage, emptied of guests, seemed larger, and then, oddly smaller. She tidied the table, gathered crumbs, set the ladle to drain, so it would not ice in the night. She refolded the cloth over the dough. She stirred the hearth. The rhythm of these tasks usually smoothed the edge of any feeling, but the edge held. She thought of the way the grey-bearded one had said, promised, and the way the youngest had eaten his figs, as if they were the last of something hard-won. She had seen in their faces what travelers sometimes carry, the look of people who have left home and are not sure what home will be when they return. She stepped outside as evening curled its fingers around the roofs. The star burned clearer now. A neighbor boy, cheeks red from the cold, stood in the lane and stared up, mouth open. Do you see it every night? He asked, without looking down. Every night, she said, and tonight it is brighter. What is it? The boy asked. A sign, she said, and the word felt strange in her mouth, because she stood against signs that interrupted the work before her. At least that is what the men said. What men? He asked, finally tearing his gaze from the sky to look at her. Travelers, she answered. They stopped for bread. The boy set's eyes widened. Did they have stories? They had a road, she said. Sometimes that is the same thing. She shooed him home. With a tilt of her head, he laughed and went, his boots scuffing the hard ruts. Night gathered. She kept the lamp low to spare oil. Each familiar object claimed its place. The broom by the door, the basket for kindling, the small stool where she sat to quilt, a torn hem. She worked by touch, because the work knew her hands well enough not to require a bright light. When she set the cloth aside, the cottage made the quiet sounds of winter, the wood settling, the slow pop of a coal, a draft, testing a crack along the window frame. Sleep did not come quickly. She rolled and found the spot where the mattress did not complain against her hip. She turned again and faced the window, where the bright star made a pale square on the floorboards. She remembered the offer, come with us. It had been spoken without pressure, and it had been refused without drama. Still the words traveled with her into the shallows of sleep and rose with her when she surfaced again, as if the tide within her had its own bright marker and was not yet done. Toward midnight she rose and set another small log on the fire. The bread for morning had risen too much under the cloth. She knocked it back with the heel of her hand, feeling the stubborn spring in the dough that told her it would still be good. She opened the door to let the cold take the thick heat from the room, and stood in the doorway, arms folded, looking toward the dark hills. Somewhere out there men were riding. Somewhere out there a child waited, if the men were right. She did not imagine angels or a stable. She imagined only a young mother, tired in a way that settled in the bones, and a quiet father looking for a place where the roof did not leak. She had seen such parents. She had carried hot cloths to such mothers, and she had stood aside for such fathers with her usual rough courtesy that meant more than her tone admitted. The thought joined the brightness of the star and the rhythm of her own old habits, and for the first time they did not fit easily together. She shut the door, secured the latch, and returned to bed. The star hung where it had been, refusing to move, as if to say that not all things the heavens declare are meant to hurry those who see them. In the grey wedge before dawn she slept at last, and dreamed the simple dream of a floor swept clean, and a table set for unexpected guests. In the dream there were small shoes beside the hearth, placed neatly, as if by hands that hoped for a kindness. She woke with the hush of the dream still around her, and listened for any sound at the door. There was none. Morning had done its quiet work. The star, hidden by daylight, waited for night to state itself again. She lit the lamp, stirred the embers, and began the day's tasks. The broom leaned where it always leaned. Everything was as it had been the day before, and yet a difference had taken hold that would not be commanded away. By noon she had finished her sweeping and set rolls to bake. She carried a loaf to the shoemaker's wife, and warmed her tea, and told her, in a tone that tried to sound like simple gossip and failed at it, about the travelers and their question. The younger woman listened, with eyes that brightened at the mention of a child. "If they find him," she said, "what then?" "They will do what they came to do," the old woman answered. "Honor him." "And you?" the young woman asked, not from impertinence, but from the gentle curiosity that comes when one person has been surprised by another's story. "I will sweep," the old woman said, and meant it, and did not mean only that. She walked home slowly, the breadbasket lighter, her steps careful on the icy places she herself had pointed out to the men. In the lane she paused again to look to the hills. The cold made her eyes water. She was not a woman who cried easily, and so she turned the wetness into a complaint about the wind and went inside. The afternoon folded itself toward evening. She set the small shoes from her dream out of mind, because she was not a woman who believed in dreams. Yet when she laid another log on the fire and stoked it until a soft heat spread through the room, she found herself glancing at the hearthside, as if she expected to see two little shapes waiting there. She laughed, a short sound at her own foolishness, then grew quiet again, because it did not feel like foolishness so much as waiting. When the first bell in the village struck for vespers, the old woman sat with the broom across her knees and looked at the bristles worn by years along the same stones. She thought of the word promised, and the weight the bearded man had placed in it. She thought of the boys in the lane, and the way they counted bells and watched the sky easily, without wondering if a floor had been swept beneath it. The star would return with night. The riders would be farther along the road she had chosen for them. The child, if he were anywhere that a star would point to, would be in the arms of tired parents, or in a place he did not choose. All of it belonged to the same world in which she kept her small house, exact and warm. She put the broom aside, and sat with her hands in her lap. It was not her custom to sit without a task. She allowed it because some decisions ripen only in stillness. She did not name it that. She simply watched the light thin and thought of bread that could be wrapped, and figs that could be shared, and small gifts that could be placed where small hands would find them. When she rose, the movement felt as much a part of her as any stroke of the broom had ever been. Night drew near. The star would soon be visible again. The road waited beyond the well. The old woman moved through her cottage as she always had, but with a new measure in her step, and the room seemed to tilt very slightly toward a door that had stood for years, and now asked to be opened for something more than a draught. Outside, a child's laugh ran along the lane and disappeared. The hearth breathed evenly. The broom leaned in its corner. The old woman tightened her shawl and looked once more to the hills, as if seeing, at last, not only where others had gone, but where she herself might yet go. Chapter 2. The Regret. Morning came with a soft wind that carried the scent of thawing snow. The hills wore a thin grey mist, and the air had that hollow quiet that comes after something has passed and left its echo behind. The old woman rose as she always did, but her steps found no comfort in their routine. She swept the same corners, tended the same fire, yet every motion felt slightly out of place, as if her hands remembered a pattern her mind could not follow. The travelers had gone. She knew this before she even looked to the road. The marks of their animals were still there, pressed into the frozen mud, but the frost had begun to soften the edges. Soon they would be gone entirely, as if no one had ever come. She stood at the doorway with her broom and traced one of the hoof prints with the tip of her shoe. It pointed east, toward the low ridges that glowed faintly in morning light. She told herself that they had been ordinary men, perhaps merchants or noblemen, on a long errand, their fine cloaks the sign of wealth rather than wonder. She told herself this several times, but the words did not settle. The way they had looked at the sky, steady, reverent, did not belong to men who weighed profit or coin. They had spoken of a promised child. That word again, promised. She tried to dismiss it, yet it followed her through the day, like a whisper she could not quite hear clearly. When she went to fetch water from the well, she caught sight of the star's faint outline, even in daylight. The neighbors spoke of it now as a marvel. Some said it was a comet. Others said it was a sign of peace or of change. The priest had promised to speak of it at Mass. The old woman listened, but did not join the talk. She did not need to add to the noise. Her thoughts were noise enough. That night, she dreamed again. This time, it was not the small shoes beside the hearth, but a road winding endlessly between hills of snow. She walked it alone, carrying her broom as a staff. Ahead of her, the light of the star pulsed like a heart. In the dream, she tried to walk faster, but her feet sank deep, and the sound of bells came faint and far. When she woke, her heart was hammering. The fire had gone out, and her breath hung in the air as a pale mist. The next days passed in half attention. She baked her bread, swept her floor, visited the shoemaker's wife, and nodded through talk of weather and markets. Yet each time she closed her door behind her, silence filled the space too quickly. The broom leaned idly against the wall. She caught herself standing still for long moments, staring at the empty chair where one of the travelers had sat. She could almost see the way his hands had rested on his knees, patient and still, as though waiting for something beyond words. She told herself she had done the right thing by staying, The world needed people who stayed. Someone must tend the hearths, feed the birds that came scratching at the windowsill, keep the path clear for those who would return. She had lived long enough to know that not everyone was meant for journeys. Yet, when she lay in bed, she thought of the Magi, though she did not yet call them that, and wondered how far they had gone. She wondered whether they had found the child. On the 5th night after their visit, the star shone brighter than ever. It burned white, almost blue, cutting through cloud and distance. The old woman stood at her window and watched it rise higher, and in that still moment, she felt something inside her break and then breathe again. It was not grief exactly, nor envy, but a deep recognition that she had chosen wrongly, not because she had stayed, but because she had not looked far enough beyond the edge of her own firelight. She wrapped her shawl tight and went to the chest by her bed. Inside were small things she had saved across years: a length of bright ribbon, a wooden spoon carved by her father, the last of a jar of honey that had crystallized into amber lumps. She packed them carefully into a basket. Beside them, she placed loaves of bread, still warm from the evening's bake, and a handful of dried fruit. It was not much, but it was what she could give. Then she reached for her broom, the only companion she trusted to steady her steps on the frozen road. When she opened the door, the night air struck her cheeks like a wakeful slap. The village was asleep. Chimneys puffed faint smoke into the stillness. She stood for a moment at the threshold, unsure whether she meant to take one step or many. But the star hung over the eastern hills, fixed and patient, and she thought, if they have not yet found the child, then perhaps they will need another pair of hands. So she walked. The snow had crusted into hard, glittering scales that cracked under her boots. Each sound echoed far, making her feel both exposed and entirely alone. The road she had described to the travelers was clear enough in moonlight, but its familiarity soon turned strange. The trees leaned differently in the dark, and the ditches seemed deeper than by day. The broom which she used now as a walking stick left small marks behind her like a signature. In time she stopped looking back at them. She walked until dawn, and when light came, it showed the land, vast and pale and empty. No riders, no animals, no trail, only frost and quiet hills. The basket was lighter now. She had eaten one of the loaves. She told herself she would rest and turn back once she had reached the ridge. But at the ridge, she saw another rise beyond it, and beyond that, another. The star did not shrink with distance. It only seemed to draw her forward. By midday, she came to a crossroads marked by an old shrine. Its paint had peeled, and inside the niche, a small wooden saint leaned forward as if listening to her breath. She set down her basket and brushed snow from her sleeves. "Have they passed this way?" she asked the air, feeling foolish even as she spoke. A wind moved through the trees. As if in answer, she looked down and saw footprints in the snow, not of men, but of children, small, scattered prints leading eastward. She followed them until they vanished among the drifted grass. The prints could have been anyone's, perhaps the village children playing at morning, yet they stayed in her mind, as if placed there to remind her of what she sought. She began to hum an old lullaby, one her mother had sung when nights grew too long. The tune steadied her steps. Toward evening she reached another village, smaller than her own. Smoke curled from only 2 chimneys. The people she met looked weary, but kind. They gave her water, and one woman offered a cup of milk warmed with herbs. When the old woman asked where the travelers had passed, A group of 3, finely dressed, following a bright star. The villagers nodded. "Days ago," said one. "They spoke of a birth. They did not stay long." Something in her chest eased. She thanked them and rested by their fire until night fell. The star was still visible through the smoke hole in the roof, unwavering. She knew now that she would not stop until she found where it led. Whether she reached the child or not did not matter as much as the act of going. She slept for a few hours and dreamed again. In her dream, the child was there. Though she never saw his face, she only saw the soft light that surrounded him, the way the world seemed to grow quiet around his presence. In the dream, she placed her basket at his feet and said nothing. When she woke, her cheeks were wet with tears she did not remember shedding. By the next morning, the wind had risen, carrying fine grains of snow that stung her eyes. The road climbed and curved until the land ahead was a blur of white and light. She stopped once to rest and looked back. She could not see her village now. The star was her only guide. Each step seemed to lighten her body, as though she were walking not towards something, but into something, into meaning, or forgiveness, or perhaps only understanding. That night, near exhaustion, she reached the edge of a broad valley. Or signs of passage here, hooves, footprints, faint ruts, where wheels had cut through mud. The trail wound down toward a cluster of small lights at the valley's floor. She thought she heard distant singing. It might have been her imagination, or the wind catching through hollows, but she followed it all the same. She came at last to a field where shepherds watched their flocks. They looked at her in surprise, but did not question her presence. One pointed toward the far end of the valley, where a small glow rose like a lantern behind a ridge. She thanked him and walked again, her legs trembling with cold. When she reached the ridge, the light vanished. She climbed higher, her breath hard and thin. On the other side, there was nothing. No house, no camp, only open land touched by faint starlight. She stood there for a long while, her basket in her hands, the cold cutting deep. Perhaps she was too late. Perhaps they had come and gone. She sank to her knees and whispered into the wind, "If you are there, take what I have." She placed the basket on the ground, its contents simple but sincere: bread, honey, fruit, a ribbon. She covered it lightly with snow so it would not blow away. Then she rose, leaned on her broom, and turned toward the long road home. The walk back was harder. Her limbs ached, her breath rasped, and she stopped often to rest. Yet something within her was lighter now. The choice she had delayed had been made, even if too late, to change what was past. The regret remained, but it was a quiet regret, shaped by the act of trying. The star followed her still, though she no longer looked to see if it guided her. She walked beneath it until she could no longer tell whether it was above her or within her. When she finally reached her cottage, dawn was breaking. She set her broom by the door and warmed her hands by the fire. The room felt both familiar and strange, as if seen for the first time after a long absence. On the hearth, beside the coals, lay a small shape of ash she did not remember leaving. It was the outline of a tiny shoe. She bent close, touched it gently, and felt only warmth. Then she sat, and for the first time in many years, she wept without shame. Outside, the wind turned softer. The star still burned in the sky, but now it seemed less a summons and more a memory. She had missed the travelers, she had missed the child, but she had found her purpose, and it would guide her every winter night for the rest of her days. Chapter 3. The Journey. In the weeks that followed, the old woman's life returned to its familiar pattern, yet nothing within her truly settled. She swept her floors, baked her bread, tended her hearth, but each motion carried a new awareness, a faint tremor beneath the surface of her calm. Where once she had worked to keep dust and disorder at bay, she now felt that some deeper disorder lived quietly inside her. The broom could not touch it, and the fire could not burn it away. Word of the travelers spread slowly between villages. Shepherds told of 3 noble strangers who had passed through their valleys, guided by a star brighter than any lantern. Some said they had come to worship a king born among the poor. Others claimed they had vanished into the hills and never been seen again. The tales differed, but each carried the same thread of wonder. The old woman listened when these stories reached her door. She asked careful questions, then nodded with polite detachment, though her heart tightened each time she heard the words child or star. As winter deepened, the roads grew harder. Frost thickened on the windows and stayed there, even when the morning sun reached the glass. The old woman kept her fire high and her cottage warm. The villagers came to her for help, as they always had. Children with torn mittens, mothers with little food left for the week. She gave what she could, and in giving she found a quiet rhythm that eased her loneliness. But when night came and the wind moaned around the eaves, she would rise from her bed, look out the window, and see the faint shimmer of that same star still burning in the distance. It seemed smaller now, but it never vanished entirely. She began to think that perhaps the travelers had not been ordinary men after all. Perhaps they truly had followed a divine sign. Perhaps the child they sought had been born just as they said, a child who would bring light to the world. These thoughts came to her gently, not as revelations, but as slow turns of understanding. She did not know theology, nor did she seek to, but she knew longing, and she knew how it felt to have waited too long to act. One night, as snow fell softly outside and her fire flickered low, she sat at her table and stared at the ashes on her hearth. They formed no shape this time, yet she imagined she saw faint outlines. A star, a child's hand, a road. She leaned forward, and before she could think better of it, she whispered, "If I cannot reach him, then let me still bring warmth to those who wait." The words surprised her. She was not a woman who prayed aloud, yet as she spoke them, something inside her settled into a kind of peace. Perhaps she could not undo her choice, but she could make meaning from it. If the child had come into the world, then there were other children too, cold, hungry, and afraid, and she could still serve them. That winter, she began a small ritual. On the night before the feast of the Epiphany, she baked more bread than usual, wrapped small bundles of food, and left them near the doors of poor families before dawn. She worked quietly, unseen. When the villagers found the gifts, they wondered who had left them. Some said it must have been the priest. Others whispered that perhaps the travelers had returned. The old woman smiled at their guesses, but said nothing. She had no need to be known. As the years passed, the ritual grew. She added fruit when she could, bits of honeycomb, sometimes a toy carved from scrap wood. When she became too frail to walk the lanes easily, she asked the older children to deliver the bundles in secret, telling them only, "Give it before sunrise, and tell no one who sent you." The children obeyed gladly, delighted by the mystery. The villagers began to notice that the gifts always appeared on the same night each year, the eve of the Epiphany. When the church celebrated the visit of the Magi to the Christ child, they began to tell stories about the giver. Some said she was a kindly witch. Others said she was a saint in disguise. Over time, Her own name faded, replaced by a new one that passed from mouth to mouth. La Befana. She did not hear that name at first. She only knew that her neighbors smiled more often in winter, that children left their shoes by the hearth in hope of small surprises. The act gave her comfort. It made the long nights shorter and the silence less sharp. She no longer looked for the star as often. It had already guided her to her purpose. But the years are long, and memory is a stubborn guest. Each January, as snow thickened and the feast approached, she found herself standing at her window once more, watching the frozen fields. She would think of the travelers, their tired faces, their strange accents, their unwavering faith, and she would wonder if they had found what they sought. She hoped they had, and if they had, she hoped they had forgiven her for not going with them. One such winter, near the end of her life, she sat by her hearth with her broom across her knees. The wind outside had risen, whistling down the chimney and scattering the flames. She was very old now, her hands thin and veined like river maps. Her joints ached, but her eyes still held a clear light. The children of the village had grown and had children of their own, yet they still spoke of the mysterious gifts that came each year. They had begun to leave small tokens of gratitude at her door, flowers, drawings, bits of ribbon. She smiled at them all. That night, she dreamed once more. The dream began, as they always did, with snow, with light, with the faint sound of bells. But this time the road did not stretch endlessly. It led to a small, quiet stable, lit by a single flame. Inside, she saw a young woman seated beside a child, asleep in a manger. The woman looked up and smiled at her, not as a stranger, but as one who had been expected. The old woman knelt and placed her broom beside the door, as if to say she would sweep no more tonight. She stepped forward and reached out her hands. The child stirred, but did not wake. His face was calm, his breath steady. The light around him grew brighter until it filled everything. When she woke, the fire had gone out. The first pale glow of dawn touched her floor. She sat for a long while in silence, feeling warmth, though the air was cold. She knew, without needing to be told, that her journey had ended. In the years that followed, the villagers continued her tradition. They told their children that on the eve of the Epiphany, an old woman rides across the skies on her broom, delivering gifts to those who have been good and leaving coal for those who have not. They said she still searches for the child she once failed to meet, visiting every home in hope of finding him at last. And so each winter night, when the air smells of wood smoke and frost, and distant bells seem to drift through the wind, people still look to the sky and remember her, the woman who turned regret into kindness, who found redemption not in miracles, but in simple acts of giving. They call her La Befana, and they leave their shoes by the hearth, waiting for her to pass once more on her endless, gentle journey. Chapter 4. The Night of Epiphany. In every generation after her passing, the story of the old woman near the well changed a little. The faces of those who had known her faded from memory. The cottages she had swept were replaced by others, and still her tale was told. At first it was simple, a lonely woman who had turned her sorrow into kindness. Then over time it became something else, a story of magic and devotion, of a woman who still roamed the winter skies, her broom sweeping away the cold, and her laughter echoing among the stars. It is said that on the night before the feast of the Epiphany, when the world lies hushed beneath snow, the veil between heaven and earth grows thin. In that stillness, The spirit of La Befana awakens. She is no longer bound by the small walls of her cottage or the frailty of her hands. Her broom has become her steed, carrying her over mountains and valleys, past frozen rivers and sleeping towns. Her shawl flutters behind her like a tattered banner of warmth against the chill of the sky. Children wait for her now. They leave their shoes by the hearth or windowsill, clean and ready. Some place a glass of wine or a small plate of biscuits beside them, gifts for the kindly old woman who will pass before dawn. They know that if they have been good, their shoes will be filled with sweets and fruit by morning. If they have been unkind or lazy, they will find only a lump of coal or a dark piece of ash. But even then, the coal is not a curse. It is a reminder that warmth comes from effort, that goodness must be tended like a fire. In the villages, bells ring for the Epiphany Mass, and smoke rises from chimneys where families gather to share the bread and honey of the season. Yet outside, high above the rooftops, another ritual continues. La Befana rides on, her broom tracing quiet arcs through the stars. She stops where children sleep fitfully and parents whisper hopes into the dark. She listens at windows, her ear to the world's dreaming heart, and then she reaches into her bag to leave a token of care. Some say she carries not only sweets and toys, but also blessings, an unseen touch that softens grief, a spark that kindles kindness in those who receive it. Others say she is searching still, forever wandering from door to door, in hope of finding the child she once refused to visit. They say that when she finds him, she will finally rest. Her broom laid to one side, her long journey ended at last. But perhaps it is not sorrow that drives her now. Perhaps it is joy, the joy of giving, of mending what can be mended, of finding warmth in the act of kindness itself. In every home where laughter rises, in every hearth where light endures against the cold, she finds a piece of the child she sought. Each gift she leaves is another chance at redemption, another spark of the miracle she once missed. There are those who claim to have seen her, a flicker at the edge of the clouds, a whisper of wind that smells faintly of cinnamon and smoke, the trace of small footprints across a rooftop dusted with frost. Sometimes a stray broom is found leaning against a wall after a night of snow, and mothers smile knowingly as they bring it inside. She has been here, they tell their children. She swept the cold from our doorstep. As dawn breaks on the day of the Epiphany, the world wakes to her passage. Streets seem cleaner, the air gentler, and hearts lighter. The old stories are told again by firelight, of the woman who once missed her chance to meet a miracle, and who has been making amends ever since, not through sorrow, but through love. And so, when the night of Epiphany returns each year, and the sky glitters with the same bright star that once guided 3 travelers long ago, people remember her. They look up and whisper her name softly, not as a legend, but as a friend. Somewhere above, a faint laugh drifts on the wind, and the soft sound of sweeping fades into the distance. La Befana continues her endless flight, her light carried not by a star, but by the hearts she warms below. She is the quiet guardian of winter nights, the keeper of small mercies, and the reminder that even missed chances can bloom into grace. Her journey never truly ends, because kindness, once given, circles back through time like the turning of the seasons. And so, the old woman near the well lives on, in stories, in laughter, in the hush that comes before dawn, on the night of Epiphany, when the world waits, gentle and expectant, for the soft sweep of her passing. And now we leave the warmth of Befana's hearth and return to the restless dark of the northern sky. Here, winter is not gentle at all. It races across the clouds like a storm with teeth, and the wind is said to carry more than snow. For in these lands, people once believed that on the wildest nights, the dead themselves rode the storm, led by a spectral hunter whose name changed from one valley to the next. This is the legend of the wild hunt, the winter host that no traveler wished to meet upon the open road. Chapter 1. When the wind spoke of gods. Long before the story of the wild hunt became a tale whispered by peasants at winter hearth, it was a thing of the old faiths, a breath of the divine that moved through forests and mountains when the world grew still. In the Germanic lands, where the winds howled over the heath and through the dark woods of Saxony and Thuringia, people believed that Woden, lord of battle and wisdom, rode forth during the long nights of winter. His company was no mortal army, but a host of the dead and the unseen, riding storm clouds and shrieking wind. To hear them was a warning, to see them was a peril. The old people said the hunt came in the 12 nights between Yule and Epiphany, when the world balanced between the dying year and the newborn one. The veil between the living and the dead was thin, and the gods themselves were restless. Woden was not alone in his passage. The souls of warriors, long dead, the spirits of the unbaptized, and the shades of the drowned were said to follow him. Dogs howled before the storm, and travelers on lonely paths hurried to find shelter, for to be caught in the hunt was to vanish forever, or to return changed, half alive, half spirit. When thunder rolled across the hills, many said it was Wodan's chariot or the hooves of his spectral steeds. Some left offerings by the door, bread, beer, or a few grains of salt, hoping that the riders would pass by without harm. The wind itself seemed to carry voices, snatches of song and laughter, the cries of hounds and the blare of unseen horns. Those who heard it too closely often fell ill or never woke again. In some places, mothers warned their children not to whistle at night, for it might call the hunt down upon them. Chroniclers of the early Middle Ages recorded such beliefs with a mix of awe and disapproval. The monk Orderic Vitalis wrote of ghostly processions seen in Norman fields, a vast troop of wandering souls led by a mighty figure, half god, half demon. Even as the Christian faith spread, the old belief endured beneath new names. Wodan became Odin to the Northmen, and later, in the Christian imagination, he was recast as a cursed king, or a devil leading the damned through storm and shadow. Yet the heart of the story did not change. The wild hunt was always a crossing between worlds, a moment when the divine and the mortal touched. In some German tales, the leader was Frau Holder, the bright and terrible goddess of winter. She too was said to ride with her host, gathering the souls of the unbaptized children and guiding them to the next world. Her passage was marked by drifting snow and the cry of owls. In other regions, Perchta took her place, a spirit of judgment, rewarding the diligent and punishing the lazy during the dark days after Yule. The hunt, whether led by Woden or Holder, was always a thing of balance, death and renewal, wrath and protection, terror and awe. There are old accounts from Saxony of farmers who claim to have seen the hunt crossing the sky like a storm of sparks. One story tells of a miller who stayed out too late on a winter night. He heard horns and laughter, saw shapes moving through the clouds, and ducked into a hollow tree. When he dared to look again, a pale rider leaned from the wind and offered him a drink from a silver cup. The miller, trembling, poured it out onto the ground rather than accept it, and when he returned home, the earth where the drink had fallen was scorched black, and the cup was gone. Such stories were not told as fables, but as warnings, reminders that the hunt was still abroad. By the 13th century, the wild hunt had become both myth and omen to knights and priests. It symbolized divine wrath. To common folk, it remained a mystery of the old world. Chroniclers wrote of ghostly hosts seen above battlefields, their cries mingling with the wind and thunder. In Saxony, it was said that when a great leader fell, Woden would ride to claim his soul for the hunt. In Westphalia, hunters who broke oaths or desecrated sacred groves were doomed to join the host forever. Even in later centuries, when belief in the old gods had long faded, the hunt lingered in the countryside. People still spoke of nights when the storm carried voices, the smell of smoke and frost in the air, the sudden silence of animals. These were signs that the riders were near. The old prayers changed into Christian charms, a cross drawn on the door, a candle kept burning through the night. But behind these gestures, the same fear remained, that the dead did not always rest, and that the sky itself could come alive with riders unseen. Thus the legend endured, shifting like the wind that bore it. It was never just a story of gods or ghosts, but a reflection of the winter soul of humankind, our need to name the storm, to give voice to the unseen forces that move through the dark. In every age, people looked to the sky and heard something vast beyond their understanding. Whether they called it Woden's hunt, Holder's ride, or the furious host, it was always the same truth, dressed in different words, that life and death ride together through the turning of the year, and that sometimes when the night is still enough, the old gods pass overhead once more. Chapter 2. Hurlespus Return. Among the oldest tales of the British Isles, there is one that lingers like a shadow over the hills of Herefordshire and the marches of Wales. It tells of Hurla, a king of ancient Britain, whose fate was bound to the timeless mystery that later generations would call the Wild Hunt. His story is neither wholly mortal nor wholly fey, but something caught between them, an echo of a world where the borders of time and death were not yet firm. In the age before the coming of the Saxons, Hurla was said to have been a wise and proud ruler, lord of a warlike people. One day, as he journeyed through the deep forests of the west, he met a strange figure upon the path, a king no taller than his horse's knee, yet clothed in splendid armor and crowned with gems that glimmered like stars. This little king greeted Hurla as an equal and invited him to attend his wedding beneath the earth, promising friendship between their peoples. Hurla, bound by the honor of kingship, agreed. So began the tale that would end in eternal wandering. Hurla descended with his retinue into a cavern at the base of a great hill. There, beyond mortal sight, was a hall filled with light and music, the realm of the fairy folk. The feast lasted 3 days, or so it seemed. When the time came to depart, the fairy king offered Hurla rich gifts, horses, hounds, and falcons, more splendid than any mortal breed. Yet he gave also a warning. None of Hurla's men must dismount from their horses until the small dog that rode upon Hurla's saddle should leap down first. Only then, said the fairy king, would their journey home be safe. The king thanked his host and rode out from the hill. The sunlight dazzled them after the golden glow of the fairy halls. But when they emerged into the open air, the world was changed. The trees had grown thick where none had been. The hills wore different names. The language of the people who now tilled the fields was strange to their ears. Centuries had passed while they had feasted beneath the earth. Confused and fearful, Hurler sought to return to his hall, but his castle was long gone, its stones scattered and overgrown. Men told him that no such king had ruled for 200 years. In despair, some of his followers leapt from their horses to walk the ground, only to crumble into dust where they stood, as if the weight of centuries had lain hidden in their flesh. The rest, remembering the fairy king's warning, dared not dismount, and so, cursed by the passing of time and by the folly of a promise, they rode on. From that day, travelers crossing the borderlands between England and Wales spoke of a ghostly cavalcade that swept through the night. The sound of hooves, the cry of hounds, the echo of horns, all heralded the passing of Hurler and his host. Some said they were seen before great battles or storms, others that they appeared at weddings and funerals alike, reminders that all joy carries the seed of its own ending. Chroniclers of the 12th century, such as Walter Map, recorded their passing in sober ink, not as superstition, but as witnessed truth. Map himself wrote that King Hurler had once been a man, but was now condemned to wander until the end of days. In the telling, Hurler's company grew ever larger. Some claimed the souls of warriors slain in war joined his ranks. Others said that Hurler rode at the head of the dead kings of Britain, his banner tattered, and his eyes hollow as the moon. The little dog, it was whispered, still sat upon his saddle, never leaping down, holding the curse unbroken, and so the host must ride forever between earth and sky, never resting, never dying. Later generations came to call him Hurlething, then Hurlechin, and in time the name changed into Heliquin, the very same spectral host that would fill French chronicles as the Mesnée de Heliquin, the furious company of the dead. But at the root of them all was King Hurler, the forgotten monarch of Britain, who vanished beneath the hills and returned too late for his own age. It is said that when the wind blows hard across the Welsh border and the clouds gather low over the Wye, one may still hear the echo of hooves upon the air. The horns call faintly, the hounds bay unseen, and though the names have changed, the riders are the same, for the hunt does not die. It only passes from land to land, from faith to faith, wearing new masks, but always carrying the same warning, that no oath made to the other world is ever truly broken, and that time itself may be the cruelest rider of all. Chapter 3. The Furious Host. In the lands across the Channel, where the forests of Normandy and Brittany breathe mist and shadow, the wild hunt was known by another name, La Mesnée de Helcan, the host of Helcan. It was a name spoken softly by travelers and peasants alike, for to name the host aloud was to risk drawing its attention. In these French tales, the hunt was not led by a god or a fairy king, but by the restless dead, a host of souls condemned to ride forever through the night for the sins they could not leave behind. The earliest written accounts of this vision come from the 12th century. Chroniclers, such as Orderic Vitalis, wrote with unease of vast processions of spirits, seen crossing the countryside, armed and shouting, their faces pale and burning like embers. The chronicler described peasants who stumbled upon these companies, thinking them mortal soldiers, only to find that the riders were hollow-eyed, and the air around them heavy with heat and frost at once. Some fainted, others fled, a few died soon after, as if the chill of the grave had touched them. Orderic wrote of one such vision near the Norman village of Bonneval. A priest, traveling alone at night, was overtaken by a troop of countless figures, men and women, nobles and beggars alike, bound together by invisible chains. They carried swords, spades, and tools of labor, crying out as if in pain. At their head rode a great dark figure clad in black mail, his face hidden beneath a helm of iron. This, the people said, was Harlequin, the leader of the furious host. Whether demon or damned man, none could tell. His hounds, black as coal, ran before him, their eyes burning with fire. Wherever they passed, doors rattled, cattle moaned, and children woke screaming from their beds. In these accounts, the hunt was no longer divine. It was purgatorial. It became a warning against pride, greed, and unshriven sin. Those who died in violence or deceit, it was said, might join Harlequin's company. The restless souls marched or rode in endless penance, a ghostly procession between heaven and hell. Yet even as the church sought to claim the legend, the old shape of the story remained beneath. The horns that called through the night still sounded like the horns of Wodan's riders, and the storm that followed them still bore the same dread. In Brittany, where old pagan roots ran deep, the tale changed again. There, the hunt was called Arbel Aredverv, the Ride of the Dead. On winter nights, when the wind rolled down from the sea, people swore they could hear the clatter of hooves and the mournful baying of hounds. The dead were said to ride to the places they had loved or wronged in life, visiting old homes and battlefields before vanishing at dawn. Some left behind footprints of ash in the snow. Others said they saw torches moving through the fog, though no hands held them. There is a tale from Brittany of a farmer who once heard the hunt while walking home. After midnight, he hid beneath a hedge. As the sound grew near, out of the mist came a throng of riders, thin, transparent figures, dressed in torn robes and armor. Their horses' hooves made no sound on the frozen earth. As they passed, one rider turned his hollow face toward the farmer and spoke, "Tell them to pray for us." When the man looked again, the host had vanished, but frost rimmed his hair, and a greyhound's footprint smoked upon the road. Over time, the figure of Harlequin began to merge with others. In some regions, he was said to be the ghost of a cruel huntsman who once defied God. In others, he was a fallen angel, condemned to lead sinners on their endless chase. Later still, the image softened into that of Harlequin, the trickster of medieval theater, proof that even the darkest myths can wear new masks. But in the countryside, the older fear persisted. Well into the 17th century, peasants of Normandy still crossed themselves when thunder broke over the fields, muttering, "The host rides tonight." The furious host served as both story and warning that the deeds of the living echo after death, and that the world of the unseen is never far away. It was not simply a haunting, it was a mirror held up to human sin and sorrow. The church preached of judgment to come, but the people of the villages saw judgment already abroad in the night sky, riding, crying, calling, and perhaps that is why the legend endured. For in every heart there is some small knowledge of guilt, some ancient fear of being pursued. The hunt gave form to that fear. Its riders were not strangers, but reflections of all who wander astray. The horns of Harlequin still echo faintly in the oldest woods of France, carried on the wind between the seasons, where the living whisper prayers for the restless dead, and the dead ride on, forever seeking peace they cannot find. Chapter 4. The Northern Ride. In the far north, where the winters stretch long, and the nights swallow the horizon, the wild hunt was known by many names: the Asgårdsryan, the Åsgårdsrey, the Åsgårdsfjord. Its riders were said to come howling through the midwinter sky, bringing storm, sickness, and sudden death to those who crossed their path. Yet there was reverence too, for the hunt was not only an omen of doom, but a reminder that the old gods still passed through the world, unseen, but not forgotten. The tales of the northern hunt are among the oldest and most vivid in Norway. People spoke of a host led by Odin himself, the High One, bearing his spear Gungnir and riding his eight-legged steed Sleipnir. His company was vast and terrible, slain warriors from ancient battles, women who had died in childbirth, and the wandering dead who had never found peace. Their passage was marked by roaring wind and lightning that flashed like blades through the clouds. When the storm rose suddenly over the fjords, the people would whisper, "The hunt rides tonight." Yet the hunt was not always Odin's. In other regions, it was said to be led by Guro Risarova, a wild queen with the tail of a horse, who raced through the skies with her followers, laughing and screaming in the gale. In Sweden and Denmark, the leader was sometimes Lucy, a spectral woman, whose night, Lucinatta, fell before Christmas. On that night, she and her riders burst through chimneys and windows, punishing those who worked or baked after dark, when all should have been resting for the holy days. Children were told to go to bed early, lest Lucy carry them away in her sack. In Iceland, the hunt's echoes took another shape. There, it was said that during Jól, the midwinter festival, the dead returned to visit their homes. Candles were left burning through the night, and food laid out for unseen guests. Those who forgot such offerings risked the anger of the wandering host. The wind that whistled through the eaves was believed to be the breath of the riders passing by. In some sagas, the Draga, the restless dead, rode with them, shaking the air with their laughter. The old poets spoke of them not as devils, but as the old powers of the world, still alive in storm and winter. One Norwegian tale tells of a farmer who returned late from market on a night when snow swept in from the mountains. As he crossed the ridge, he heard horns echoing through the wind and saw shapes swirling in the sky, pale horses, men and women cloaked in shadow. He threw himself to the ground as a rider swept past, her eyes glowing like embers. She struck his hat from his head and vanished into the snow. When he found the hat the next morning, it was scorched through as if by fire. For years after, he would not venture out after dark during Yule, for fear that the Oscaré would take him. The northern hunt carried layers of meaning. In the old days it was the movement of the gods, the passage of Odin and his host from world to world. Later, under Christian influence, it became a vision of the dead or of sinners condemned to wander. But the people who lived closest to the wind still felt something deeper in it, not punishment, but the old rhythm of life and death, light and darkness, turning through the year. The hunt was the voice of the season itself, wild and merciless but necessary, driving winter onward so that spring might come again. Folk tradition in Norway held that the hunt could be diverted or appeased. If its riders were heard in the distance, one might throw a steel blade into the snow or turn one's pockets inside out to confuse the spirits. Others placed crosses over the doors or recited old charms that mixed Christian prayer with older words whose meaning had been long forgotten. And yet, even with such protections, few dared to step outside when the wind howled and the sky grew pale with snowlight. For the hunt was not bound by walls or prayer, it belonged to the world beyond. In later centuries, when scholars began to collect the old stories, the Asgårdsrein was already fading from living memory. But in the valleys of Telemark and the mountains of Hardanger, old folk still remembered the sound, the rush of air, the barking of unseen hounds, the flicker of light through the trees. Some called it superstition, others a memory of the divine. Yet among the oldest, there was a quiet acceptance. They said the hunt came not only for the dead, but for all who had forgotten the old ways, to remind them that the world was larger than their hearths and churches. The northern hunt was a song of power and loss. It belonged to the time when men believed that every gust of wind had a will, and every shadow a name. When storms rolled down from the mountains, people still paused to listen. Somewhere in the roaring darkness, they could hear it, the faint echo of hoofbeats, the cry of riders unseen, and the long memory of gods who would not let the world forget them. Chapter 5. The Echo of Hooves. Though centuries have passed since the wild hunt last ruled the night sky, its echo has never wholly faded. It lingers in the places where old beliefs cling to the earth, in the moors and forests, in the sound of distant thunder, in the sudden silence before a storm. The hunt, once divine and terrible, became over time a tale whispered by hearthfire, half warning and half wonder. Yet even as the world turned toward reason and faith, the fear remained that something still rode in the dark beyond sight. In the 17th and 18th centuries, travelers in Germany, Denmark, and the British Isles still claimed to hear the hunt on winter nights. Priests and scholars dismissed it as imagination, a trick of wind and weather, but the villagers who lived close to the land knew otherwise. They spoke of nights when animals grew restless, and fires guttered without cause. Doors would rattle as if struck by unseen hands, and the air outside filled with a sound like galloping hooves, mixed with the howl of hounds. Those who looked through the window at such moments often regretted it. Some said the stars themselves seemed to move, streaking across the heavens as if driven by some vast and hidden will. The hunt had changed names many times by then. Wütend is here, Gabriel's hounds, Herod's hunt, Herne's riders. But it was always the same vision, a host of souls or spirits moving through the night, bound together by wind and fire. In England, the figure of Herne the hunter emerged, a ghost of Windsor Forest, said to wear the antlers of a stag and lead a spectral chase through the woods. Some believed Herne was once a royal huntsman who had taken his own life, doomed thereafter to hunt forever. His legend merged easily with the older wild hunt, and soon the people of the shires spoke of his passing as they once had of Woden's. When a great wind tore through the oaks of Windsor, they would whisper, "Herne rides again." In parts of Scandinavia, the hunt was heard even into the 19th century. Farmers returning late from market told of seeing a pale glow moving through the trees, followed by a rush of air that smelled of cold iron. In one tale from Telemark, a man on his way home heard voices calling his name from above. He ran, but the sound followed him until he threw himself face down in the snow and prayed. When he looked up, the stars seemed to spin, and faint hoofprints had been burned into the frost around him. He never spoke of it again, save to warn his children never to mock the wind. The old belief adapted itself to every age. To some it became a superstition, to others a symbol. In the age of romantic poets, the hunt returned in verse and song, a memory of the wild, untamed spirit of nature, of death and freedom intertwined. Painters imagined it as a storm of riders sweeping across the sky, a dance of ghosts in moonlight. For scholars, it became an echo of pre-Christian ritual, the survival of ancient fertility rites, or ancestor worship buried beneath centuries of fear. Yet for those who still lived close to the wilderness, it remained something simpler, a story that explained why the wind sometimes sounded like hooves and horns, why the night could feel alive. In the Scottish Highlands, some still spoke of the host of the unforgiven dead, riders who swept through glens and moors on nights when the moon was hidden. Fishermen on the coasts of Brittany claim to hear them over the sea, their hounds crying through the fog. In Wales, the Cwn Anwen, the spectral hounds of the other world, still howled in the wind, their cries said to foretell death. Even in the New World, where settlers carried their stories across the ocean, the hunt was not forgotten. In the Appalachians and the deep woods of America, people told of phantom riders seen during storms, and of ghostly baying that moved through the valleys long after the thunder had passed. Perhaps it is only natural that the legend endures. The wild hunt was born of humanity's oldest fears, the fear of the storm, the dark, the unseen power that moves in nature's heart. It was also born of wonder, of the knowledge that life is never truly separate from death. When people spoke of riders in the clouds, they were not only fearing judgment, they were remembering the old gods, the ancestors, and the endless turning of the seasons. The hunt was the storm given form, a bridge between the living and the lost. In modern times, when few believe in spirits, the wild hunt still appears in stories and song. It rides now through literature and legend, through the minds of those who feel something stirring in the night wind. Some say it is only myth, a relic of the old world. Others whisper that the riders still pass unseen, bound to their eternal course. For every generation, the hunt becomes what it needs to be: omen, tale, metaphor, or memory. And when the winter wind rises and the sky fills with shifting light, something ancient still moves within it. A faint thunder, a distant horn, the echo of hooves that will never be silenced. For the hunt, once loosed upon the world, can never truly end. It is the storm that circles forever, carrying the memory of gods and men alike. And though we no longer look to the sky in fear, a part of us still listens. For in some deep wordless level, we know that the riders are still there, beyond the veil of cloud and time, waiting for the night, when the winds will speak of gods once more.